Today is January 19th, 2021. We are going on an open data journey to explore parks and recreation with the city. If you have any questions throughout the event, ask your question at slido.com with the code ODJ004. So we first wanted to start greasing your chains for thinking about data and parks. So we had some just preliminary questions, and feel free to try to answer them in the chat. But do you know how many parks there are in NYC? And hey, Gabby, I'll ask you to respond to some of my questions. I think the first one's blank and it's 1,700, but how many handball courts are there?
Like there's 546.
And if I were to find a place to roast a hot dog in a barbecue area, how many barbecue areas would I have to choose from?
Yeah, looks like there's 69.
And if someone was trying to find a playground, how many playgrounds would they have to choose from?
Let's see, the answer is 2,856.
That's a lot of playgrounds. That's awesome. And 34 running tracks, 112 food concessions, 546 handball courts. I feel like, is handball an Olympic game? There should be a game for New Yorkers to win if it's not. So today we're going to be talking about data and parks, and we're going to be looking at a lot more data than just what makes up our parks. So today we're joined by myself, Kate Nicholson, Gabby Langston, if you just want to say hi quickly.
Sure. Hi, everyone.
And Z He.
Hey.
And quickly, we've all signed in. We're going to do a short welcome and introductions, and then we're going to get started on our journey. And then at the end, we'll have time for some closing remarks and a Q&A. So open data journeys are a way that BetaNYC explores data and civic issues with our community. So they started out as worksheets that the Civic Innovation Fellowship Program created, and it has conducted events around to teach people about open data. And when the pandemic hit, we decided that we'd turn these into virtual programs where we teach people how to connect different New York City data sets and civic technology tools so that they can explore different issues. So this is our fourth one, and we're doing parks. We've done past ones on housing and safe streets and different topics. Why open data? Open data is an important resource for New Yorkers to make informed decisions, to become more engaged, and to solve problems and think about how things can be improved in their city. We're huge advocates for open data being accessible, and for also making sure that everybody has the tools and power to use it and understand it, and make sure that government's held accountable and that things are transparent. We love open data, and we recommend checking out the open data report that was released this past year. Lots of fun information. And today we're joined by the New York City Council Chair of the Parks Committee, the New York City Council Committee on the Parks, Councilmember Koo. And we're really excited. And I know I've spoken with your staff, Councilmember Elaine, who's also here, and she and you all are just a wealth of knowledge about data and parks. And so I'm really excited to have you welcome everybody here and see what this journey takes us on. So if you'd like to say hello, that'd be great.
Hi, Kay. Yeah, hi everyone. Hello and welcome to our Parks Open Data Journey. My name is Councilmember Peter Koo, and I am the chair of the City Council's Committee on Parks. 2 years ago, we saw historic levels of funding for our local parks. But last year's budget saw devastating cuts. All of us saw the results of the cuts: an increase of garbage, dirty bathrooms, overgrown grass, and fewer park workers, to name a few. All of this while park attendance sharply increased, And while parks were touted as essential to New Yorkers and our recovery, and we begin the city's budget process and the fight to restore funding to New York City parks, I want to introduce everyone to a very important tool, open data. We all have stories about our local parks, but open data takes the anecdotal and gives us hard numbers. It allows us to see exactly how many more New Yorkers went to local parks and if park complaints actually increase. We can use it to compare parks we can use it to compare parks inspection programs scores from year to year and see the relationship between the number of park workers and the amount of time it takes to resolve 311 complaints. Simply put, open data is an important tool that we can use to learn more about our parks and one that can help us make decisions. Today's training will teach us how to use open data so that we can all be better advocates for our local communities and parks as a whole. Thank you to BetaNYC for co-hosting this important training, and I look forward to working with everyone to advocate on behalf of our parks. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Council Member. I know there's some people in the room who are big advocates for parks and who have lots of questions about data and the use of it. So I'm excited to get going. So welcome. New York City parks are an essential piece of public service, or they're an essential public service for us all. They provide us with social, economic, and physical well-being. And during the pandemic, they've provided us with a lot of respite and a safe place to socially distance and get exercise. We're really curious right now, especially about how the city is investing in its parks and open spaces, because the parks are historically underfunded, and with the pandemic, they've been even more underfunded, and it begs questions when people are using the parks the most right now to get fresh air and socially distance and exercise. And when the parks are being used the most, how are we going to continue to maintain and grow our parks? Just a quick look at the landscape of New York City and our parks. This is from the New Building Congress recent report on building the future of New York parks and open spaces. And it just sort of shows you the lay of the land of how much of our land is dedicated to parks and open spaces. So the lighter color is the least amount, and the darker color is the most amount. And then on the next slide, you can see where how the number of New Yorkers or where you live and how close to a park it is. So the darker colors mean that you live close to a park, and the lighter colors mean that you live further away from the park. So I think it's just an interesting look when you sort of see the difference, and it sort of points out different social inequities that exist in where you live and your access to these spaces that are so important to us. So like we said, parks are really essential to help us have a peace of mind, play, engage with our community. And right now we're sort of at this point where the budget is 1/7 of what it was last year, and maintaining parks with the increased park attendance is going to be something that's more difficult. We saw over the summer a lot of issues with litter and social distancing, and knowing how our parks are maintained and supporting their growth and their maintenance is something that I think a lot of people are interested in. And so we wanted to sort of look and see what we could learn about parks through data to support that sort of mission. So before we really dive into all the data, we want to give you a sense of some of the tools that exist out there to explore, to look at parks. And Gabby's going to take you through a case study of Kasena, I always pronounce it wrong. My emphasis isn't on the right syllable, but Kasena Park. And we're going to answer some questions. So some of the questions we're interested in answering through data are, where is a park with specific features or facilities? Or you might wonder, how are parks funded, through whose budget within the city? You might wonder, are there events happening in the park, or are there community issues, or criminal activity, for instance, or 311 complaints? And then there's a lot more questions to be asked about. How much does it cost to maintain our park? How are the parks maintained? Who's collecting data on inspecting parks, and how? So there's so many questions, and as we'll see, there's a lot of data out there about the parks that you can sift through. So on today's journey, we'll first be going to Queens, to Kasena Corridor Park, to explore capital projects and community issues with Gabby, to give you a sense of existing tools that you can use to look at a park near you. And then we're gonna just go to the Open Data portal and take a look at a few different park data sets and ask a few questions and see if we can answer them. And that will also include the newly added social distance data sets. So without further ado, I'm gonna let Gabby, or Gabrielle, take over the floor and take you on a journey. And just a reminder, if you have questions, be sure to take a snapshot of this link at the bottom and ask them. So I'll stop sharing mine.
Alrighty. Okay, here we go. Is everyone able to see my screen? Okay. Okay, all right, so I'll get started. Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Gabrielle, or Gabby Langston, and yeah, let's take a trip to Kasena Corridor Park. And to get started, we'll navigate to the New York City Parks website. And so once you arrive at this web page, you can learn about this park using a variety of features. Okay, so to navigate to our park, what I decided to do was to type in our park name here at the search bar. And I'm basically doing this through the lens of someone who is a total novice to Queens. I'm a Brooklynite, born and raised in Brooklyn, and I'm looking to explore the city more. I'm looking to go to Queens more. So I went ahead, typed in my park name, and then afterwards, I was taken to this results page. So there seems to be a lot of results that pop up for Kasena, and I didn't know why initially. So I decided to go ahead and select the first result. Okay, and doing so, we can learn some fun facts about a park. Okay, so first, when you arrive to this webpage here, you see there's a lot going on in this interface. This is the main web page. So first and foremost, you see there is a brief description of this park. And then these are some additional features. So it'll also tell you the facilities that the park has. It also includes a list of parks located nearby and how far they are. And lastly, there's also a nice little panel at the bottom with some location information, which includes the zip code, the community board, council member, the park ID, and that particular park ID is very useful for the New York City Open Data portal. You also have the acreage listed and the property type. So we see that this park is located in Queens Community Board 7, right? It's represented by Council Member Koo, and that's a community park. Okay, so moving on, so now we can also learn some historical context about this park using the History tab. And so, reading this, we see that Kasena Corridor Park, once again, as a novice of Queens, appears to be divided into two separate corridors, and that this particular search result I clicked upon it involves the Western Corridor. So just take a brief pause and go over some main takeaways we've encountered thus far. So we see that Casena Corridor Park is in fact a community park with numerous facilities, also located in Queens Community Board 7. Also that it's over 100 acres, just the Western Corridor itself is over 100 acres. So that's about like 75 football fields, or if you're in tennis fan, it's about like 1,600 tennis courts. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, Casena Corridor Park has 2 corridors, and the area I'm focusing on today is the Western Corridor. So taking all this into account, what I wanted to find out next was, well, how are parks being maintained and how often are they being inspected? Okay, so to do so, we navigate to the inspections section of our webpage. And in fact, it's the Parks Inspection Program, which is administered by the Operations and Management Planning Division, allows the public to access information which provides a broad overview of the condition of New York City parks. And roughly 6,000 inspections occur annually. Okay, so how is this inspection data generated? Well, firstly, with handheld computers and cameras, the inspected properties receive either an acceptable or unacceptable rating for overall condition and overall cleanliness. So also, as many as 17 separate park features receive individual acceptable or unacceptable ratings, and they fall under 3 separate categories: cleanliness, landscape, and structural. So for the overall cleanliness rating for the inspection property, that is determined by all 4 of the cleanliness features, as illustrated here in this table. Whereas for the overall condition rating, that's determined by all the park features. Also worth noting that each year, these ratings are published in the Mayor's Management Report under the Department of Parks and Recreation, which provides us with a measure of the overall condition of city parks. Okay, so, taking all this, newfound info into account, let's take a deep dive into one of these inspection sites. So we head back to the inspection page, and we see for Casena Corridor Park, there are in fact 8 inspection sites. So let's go ahead and highlight one of them. Okay, so we see I've chosen to identify Casena Corridor West Zone 1, for which underneath there is the location boundaries listed. And we see there are 3 occasions from 2019 to 2020 where the overall rating was unacceptable. Just as a side note, when you scroll throughout this webpage, the inspection date ranges are from about August of 2008 through September of this past year. So heading back to those ratings between 2019 and 2020, which park features contributed to the 3 overall unacceptable ratings from 2019 to 2020? Okay, so if we look at September of this past year, we see that in fact it was litter, weeds, athletic fields, and trees which contributed to the rating. Next, if we take a deep dive into April of last year, we see that the list is a little bit shorter. So it's litter once again, followed by athletic fields. And then for our last deep dive, this is from July of 2019. And we see that the only feature that seems to have contributed to the unacceptable rating was litter. So worth noting, so the last 3 unacceptable ratings occurred in the summer of 2019 and throughout COVID. So why is that? So I definitely don't know the answer, but if I had to guess, I would probably say maybe because in the summer, there are bigger crowds, right? People like to take more advantage of this open, clean, space. So maybe it's just harder to maintain parks when there's more people using them. I'm not sure. And then in terms of COVID, maybe, due to COVID, more people are using parks, to escape homes, to have access to a leisurely, clean, open space. And that could be the case. But I decided to investigate next was, how is the city investing in this park? And so to answer that, we navigate to the Projects tab within our webpage, and we're taken to a list of capital projects, which is thus divided into 3 separate sections. So the first of which is active projects, and we see there's actually one active project listed, and it involves a path lighting construction, and it's currently in the procurement phase. Okay, so let's find out more about this active project. Okay, so we see here that once again, this involves pathway lighting at Casena Corridor Park between 56th Avenue and Colden Street. However, there's also another location listed in the Bronx at the Hutchinson River. So that's interesting. Also worth noting that if you click on the diagram on this webpage, you can have a more zoom in view, and you can actually see the diagram from the design phase. Okay, and lastly, these are some other features featured on this same webpage. So it includes locations. So once again, we see in the Bronx, as well as our park in Queens. We also see the project timeline with the design phase commencing in February of 2019, ending in January of last year. The procurement phase, beginning then in January of last year and ending and is projected to end in August of this year. And then lastly, with construction, so it says that the average time for construction is somewhere between 12 and 18 months. And then lastly, with regard to funding, we see that their funding sources are mayoral and the city council, but it indicates less than $1 million. So my main takeaways from here, well, the project, it does have a long timeline, but the exact amount of funding is not listed. So I wonder why, and that's definitely something I would be interested in looking into. Okay, so heading back to our capital projects page, our next section is proposed projects. So we see there are 2 proposed projects listed. One involves playground reconstruction and the other a ball field reconstruction. And lastly, we have completed projects. So we see there are a few projects listed here, and I'm just going to highlight one of them, which involves a path construction. Okay, so let's find out more about this. Okay, so as indicated by the descriptor, we see that this project involves reconstructing a lawn, removing a chain link fence, and just as with the active projects page, there's also a section that features the timeline, the location, a map or diagram. But what I really wanted to emphasize was the funding. So unlike the active projects page, we see here that the total funding source, the funding source is mayoral, and it's $105,000. Okay, so that led me to ask, why is there a difference in the way, the funding amount is listed? And as I stated earlier, it's definitely something I want to learn more about. Okay, so after learning all this vital new information, what I wanted to learn more about next was are people complaining about park conditions? And so to find out, we head over to BoardStat. Okay, so just as a reminder, we want to make sure we're in the right borough, right? So we're going to head to Queens as our borough. And then we have to filter to Queens Community Board 7, because as I stated earlier, that's where our park is located. And once you've done all filtering, you'll be taken to a page that looks just like this. This is the View by Community Board page. which is organized by the top 10 complaint types in the top left-hand corner, followed by a map view of New York City on the top right-hand corner, counts by descriptor in the bottom left-hand corner, followed by counts by location on the bottom right-hand corner. So just to give you an overview of this webpage without the transparent highlight. So this is our view by community board page, and just as a reminder, filter to Queens Community Board 7. And I've elected to keep the date range as is. So what this means is that any data we'll see will be from January 1st, 2010 and onward. Okay, so bearing all this in mind, are there any park-related complaints in the top 10 complaints? And the answer is yes. So it seems that we have streetlight conditions and damaged trees, both of which rank 5th and 6th respectively in the top 10 complaints in Queens Community Board 7 from 2010 onward. Okay, so have people complained about streetlights near our park? Okay, so why are we, looking at complaints near our park as opposed to in the park? And part of that is because 311 complaints contain location addresses, and these addresses are notoriously difficult to identify within a park. So therefore, looking at addresses around the park or on the perimeter may be useful. Okay, so if we want to look specifically at streetlight complaints, what we have to do is click on the bar within the top 10 complaints bar chart, and you'll see the entire interface will change. And as a result, your count of descriptor will only include descriptors for streetlight complaints. So if we look at the table here, we see that quote unquote streetlight out is the most common descriptor for streetlight complaints, which by the way are illustrated in the map view here by these little pie wedges. Okay, so let's view just one of these complaint types on the perimeter of the park. Okay, so just as a reminder, these pie wedges are streetlight complaints, and specifically the purple wedges, each wedge represents a different complaint type. So the purple wedge represent the streetlight out descriptor, as indicated here, and the green wedge represents streetlight cycling. So I decided to highlight on the purple wedge where it says streetlight out. So it's interesting to note that this occurs. Oops, says my screen sharing has paused. Oops, okay, my apologies. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have that streetlight out is in fact one of the complaints that's occurring on the perimeter of this park. And this is sort of ringing bells because if you remember, when we were using the New York City Parks website, there was an active project, right, that involved path lighting construction between 56th Avenue and Colden Street, which I actually circled here. So it led me to ask, is there a possible connection, perhaps, between the 301 complaints and the current path lighting project? This by no means is not to imply any causation, but it is certainly an interesting observation. But taking all that into account, I do want to issue a data literacy alert. And, that's because, even though we're using 301 data, there's still a lot of holes in this equation. So first and foremost, how does the city collect data on streetlights? I do not know, how is it cataloged? That's also something I don't know. Perhaps is it by mid-block or intersection? And then also, are streetlights a Parks Department issue? Or is it under the jurisdiction of the Environmental Protection? So long story short, path lighting may not show up as 301 data. And as a result, we may have to look at another data set. Okay, so next I wanted to take a deep dive into damaged trees. Okay, also have people complained about damaged trees near our park. And we're doing this investigation for the same reason as for streetlights. So our first step, once again, would be to filter to the damaged tree complaints by clicking on the blue bar within our top 10 complaint types. And then afterwards, noticing a change in the interface, we see that a fallen branch or limb is the top descriptor for damaged tree complaints, which again are indicated by these little pie wedges. Okay, so let's view some of the complaint types on the perimeter of the park. Okay, so we see when we hover over one of these pie wedges, we see that branch or limb has fallen down. This is occurring on the perimeter, as well as the entire tree has fallen down. That's also happening on the perimeter. So after navigating through this page of board stat, I wanted to know, okay, but are there any complaints from within the park? And we have this page called the address lookup feature, and this may help us. We'll see. So to get to the address lookup page, we head to page 3, as indicated by the side tabs here. And then we'll attempt to type in our park name into the search address bar. When I typed in Casena Corridor Park, I saw all these variety of search results, and I wasn't sure, which one to choose. So it's at this point that I had to issue myself another data literacy alert. So be sure to use the address lookup feature with caution, because your park can be listed in several ways, or in some cases not listed at all. So just use this feature with caution. I elected, just for simplicity, to just click on Casena Corridor Park, just to see. It's an overall view, not implying causation in any way. And I found that from 2010 onward, there were 704 streetlight complaints in Casena Corridor Park, which then led me to ask, do streetlight conditions around the park affect crime and safety in the neighborhood? And before I take a deep dive into our next tool, I do want to emphasize, streetlight designs have been around for like thousands of years, right? Including in the Chinese and in ancient Rome civilizations. And streetlights are crucial for pedestrian and driver safety, not to mention it could potentially help to reduce crime. Also, streetlights, impact a neighborhood's quality of life. And, as someone who is unfamiliar with Casena Corridor Park and with Queens, if I'm traveling somewhere to which I've never been before, or even to places I have been before, if a street is not well lit, out of safety, I'm not going to travel there. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to use Crime Map to find out more about crime, around the premises. Okay, so our first step would be to apply a variety of filters. The first of which is to apply a filter for crime locations. So this would be the crime location map. And then afterwards, there is a slight glitch. So you cannot type in your park name here. You would have to use these plus and minus icons on the top left-hand corner to zoom in and out of your web page. And the reason for this is that crime data is limited to the park and the mid-block. And as a result, Crime Map doesn't illustrate crime inside a park, but rather on its perimeter, unless there's a geocoded street that runs through the park. Okay, so keeping that in mind, our next major filter will be to filter to all crime types. And then afterwards, choosing our appropriate date. So I'm interested in the most recent crimes, So I decided to do all of 2020. So this is from the beginning of January of 2020 through November of 2020. Note this ends at November because that's the most recent data available. And afterwards, I wanted to zone in on just one of the bubbles on the perimeter. And I found that on one of these bubbles, there were 4 crimes between January and November of last year. Which led me to ask, what 4 crimes were committed between January and November of 2020? So to find out, I just filtered through the crime type tab. And in doing so, I noticed there were 2 grand larcenies, as well as 1 felony assault, as well as 1 robbery. Okay, so just to summarize, within that bubble we noticed on the perimeter, so between January and November of last year, there were 2 grand larcenies, 1 felony assault, and 1 robbery. But after going through Crime Map, I was still curious about crime inside the parks. And to be frank, if you want to have a closer look at crime within parks, we need to use the New York City Parks crime statistics, since Crime Map doesn't contain, the data within the park. Okay. And the New York City Parks crime statistics, will provide us with either PDF or an Excel, whichever one you would choose, quarterly reports of crime inside parks. But it's important to note that the report only includes properties under the jurisdiction of the Department of Parks and Recreation. For instance, Central Park is not included because its crime statistics are recorded as a patrol precinct. So I've elected to use, the PDF reports to identify crime within the park. Okay, and in doing so, I used a quick, keyboard shortcut, and also known as the find command, in order to locate the park name. And in doing so, we see that the PDF showed that this was a 2nd quarter park crime report between April and June of last year. And we see that it has a variety of information. So it contained a park name, borough, acreage, a category, as well as the 7 major complaints and a tally of all the 7 major complaints. And I did the same procedure with the other quarterly report listed. So this is now for the 3rd quarter. So this is between July and September of last year. And I went through the same procedure and noticed a couple of interesting things. So the main takeaways from here was that between April and June of last year, there was 1 robbery inside the park. And between July and September of last year, there were 2 felony assaults within the park. Okay, so just to quickly summarize what we've learned. Firstly, Casena Corridor Park, or at least the Western Corridor, is a community park roughly the size of 75 football fields or 1,600 tennis courts. Now, 1 out of its 8 inspection sites received 3 unacceptable ratings from 2019 through 2020 due to a variety of park features. Also, the funding was reported in different ways. One of the fundings gave the exact amount and the other said less than $1 million. Also, within board stat, we found that there were streetlight and damaged tree complaints near the park. And lastly, we found that in 2020, there was some crime near and also within the park. And on a final note, I wanted to echo what was said earlier and emphasize the importance of funding parks. As stated earlier, parks are traditionally underfunded, Not to mention they provide a recreational space for people to avoid dangerous streets. And they serve as a platform of equity across all neighborhoods. So if a community doesn't have a place, for leisure or community engagement, then where has the equity gone? Everyone, regardless of the neighborhood they live, has the right to access safe, clean, open spaces. And it's vital that we continue this conversation in light of this global pandemic. Okay.
Awesome.
On that
Thank
note,
you.
I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Gabby. And we had a good note in the chat from Joanna. Hi, Joanna. That capital project investments are not the same as maintenance budgets. So when we're thinking about funding parks, there's a lot more than just funding new projects to consider. And with that said, I'm going to now share my screen and show you a little bit about, show you some park data sets on the Open Data portal. So first of all, thank you, Gabby, that was excellent. And if anyone has questions, definitely post them in the Slido. We can, I think the Slido link is in the chat up above somewhere. If it's not, just ask and we'll repost it. So can everyone see my screen? Yeah,
yep.
Cool. So now that Gabby's taken you through some tools that make use of these data sets, I'm going to show you just the source of those tools. Sorry, the source of those data sets. So if you're not familiar with the Open Data portal, it's at this website, opendata.cityofnewyork.us, and it is a wealth of resources when it comes to data. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the sidebar, and I'm going to look for agency. I'm going to look for the category of agency to sort by. So I'm going to browse the data catalog by the Department of Parks and Recreation, click on that agency, and the results will show me that there are 182 data sets that the New York City Parks Department uploads to the Open Data portal, or has uploaded. Note that you can sort these data sets how you like, whether it's the last time they were updated, or the date that they were created, or alphabetically. Some of the data sets that exist are dog runs, street census, street tree census. You can find an inventory of park signage or of toilets in the park. One data set that I thought was interesting, I didn't look too into it, but one that I thought was interesting was the inventory of Aeds. It led me to think, oh, like if I was ever in the park and there was an emergency, it would be, and someone was having a heart attack and I needed to know, or I wouldn't even think to ask if there was one nearby, but the fact that there could be one nearby is interesting. And it'd be cool to know where that is. So yeah, there's a lot of data sets. They put up a lot of information, and now it's in the hands of the people to make use of it. Within the data sets, there's often a user guide that gives you notes on how to use the data set, and there's often a data dictionary, or actually there's also a data dictionary, which describes some of the terms that are used throughout the data set. So lots of data from the Parks Department, and there's a lot of questions that you could ask. And I know that some of the questions people have in mind are things like, how much did it cost to make repairs at my favorite park this year? Or how has the level of service for a specific park changed over the years? So I'm just gonna first introduce you just to a few data sets and show you some questions I explored. And then I'll get into the social distance data set, and we'll look at some social distancing data there. So one of the data sets I came across was the capital project per data set. So this is funds used to be put in to build new projects within the parks. And I was just curious, I think Gabby mentioned how the quantity is categorized, and they sort of break it down, and they have projects above $10 million, below $1 million, et cetera. and the largest category was above $10 million. So I just wanted to know what parks are we like really investing in, and in which boroughs. So you can see we have 16 capital projects above $10 million being invested in Brooklyn, followed by Queens, Manhattan, Bronx, Staten Island, and then other. Then another data set I looked at, which helped me get a better understanding of how the city allocates resources and manages parks, is this districts map, which just describes how parks, the districts of parks, which are generally, or it sort of shows you how the city manages parks into districts, sectors, and regions. And so there's these different tiers of administration that takes place. And so the districts generally correlate with the nearby community boards. And then there's different sort of maintenance and administrative tasks that take place and management that take place across these districts. And I think when Gabby took you to the Parks Department page, there's a much easier way of finding where a park's located, or what district it's in, what sector and what region, just finding in the park finder. So you wouldn't have to actually go through this, but if you wanted to make a tool that used this information, you could potentially pull from this data set. You could. Another data set that I checked out was the Parks Inspection Program data. And Gabby also pointed this out at one point in her journey. And the Parks Inspection Program is a data set that contains overall ratings that are associated with property inspections. So there's a number of different data sets under this program that are available. This one is specifically about property inspections. And the way that park inspectors inspect it is they inspect it, and then they're given, based on the things that they record, there's basically a pass or fail. And I was talking to, talking to Lynn yesterday from the North Brooklyn Parks Alliance. And we were talking just about how, it's like pass or fail, and there's so much lost in that pass or fail. And is that the way to do it? I don't know. But so this is an interesting look at, over time in the past 2 decades, just passes and fails, the number of them. I don't know, to me, there's not a lot I can really make of this graph other than, we've made a certain number. It looks like it's a pretty steady amount of fails, and the passes are variable, but it, it's a number. It really depends on how many people are out there inspecting and passing or failing them. So that was another one. And then, what? This 2 of the same slides? Yes. Oh, sorry. I was just showing you here the legend. Sorry, the top is accepted. The middle medium color is unacceptable, and the bottom is no value. So there was, or not, no action taken, or not rated. That was what it was. So there's a lot to learn about how parks are maintained. And I think this is like a question on a lot of people's minds, especially with budget cuts for maintaining parks. So how many staff members are assigned to my park? Should I be complaining about the number of staff or the quality of maintenance? And I was checking out this report. I thought it was just an interesting place to begin looking into how parks are maintained and how things have changed during the pandemic. So recently, the parks hired and trained 400 seasonal staff to help enforce social distance guidelines, which you all are probably familiar with. I know I myself, I was living in South Slope at the time when the pandemic hit, and I was going to Prospect Park as much as I could. And all of a sudden, these large signs started appearing and telling me to keep 6 feet apart from everyone. And we all know that many times this did not happen, and a lot of people were breaking these guidelines. And so in addition to putting these signs up, there were parks employees going out there and enforcing these rules. And so with that, they also were collecting data on the crowds that were gathering in parks. And so they've published these data sets on the Open Data portal. And so again, you can go to the Open Data portal And you can this time search by keywords. I chose to search by NYC Parks COVID. I don't know why NYC, I'm sure I could have just wrote Parks and COVID, but NYC Parks and COVID. It's a Google mind, I think. And I found a few different data sets. And the first one is the one that I decided to look at. And it's a data set that the NYC Parks Maintenance and Operations Division creates by going out in the field and monitoring crowds. And what they, and within, when you click on the data set, you can check out the data dictionary, which tells you a bit more about the data set. And so every line within every record within the data set, every row is one encounter that a park staff has with a crowd. And then different data is collected. They input different data into their submission of that record about that encounter. So they talk about whether or not they intervene, and if they intervene, whether or not the crowd obliges and it takes their guidance and stops crowding, or if it ignores the request or the instructions to not crowd. It also, they also record things like, was it near an amenity like a playground or a soccer field, or on a walking path? So there's a variety of different data within this record that you can check into. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So one question I thought was, just to start out, how many times did parks employees encounter a crowd in each borough? And so I clicked on the data set and I went to the visualize button up at the top, clicked it and to create a visualization, clicked on the chart button because I knew I wanted to create a borough, like I wanted a bar graph of different boroughs on the x-axis. And so that created that. And then, so when I clicked that, then I came to here and I saw that I need to fix that x-axis so that it shows what boroughs are there and the number of encounters. So I clicked up there and put it to Park Borough, which gave me this graph where you can see when you see and then when you look and see what it's measuring the number of rows, which means the number of encounters. So in Queens, there were 651 encounters, in Manhattan, 451, and so on. So that gives you a sense of the number of encounters. It could mean that there were more people deployed in Queens and more actively monitoring, or it could mean that there were more crowds to be encountered. We'll never know, I think, maybe, I don't know. Another thing that you can visualize in this, it just shows you a sort of different picture, but maybe similar, is how large were these crowds? So in all of their encounters, how many people were they encountering? So this now shows you a sum total of the number of people they approximated they were encountering. So you still see that in Queens, there was the most people that they were encountering, and followed by Brooklyn and Bronx. And you know, this could be because the parks tend to be larger in Queens and Brooklyn, and maybe there were more people deployed there. Something fun to look at. So then the next question I asked was, where are crowds being encountered in each borough? Near which amenities or in which amenities, since this is something that the staff are recording in their data submission. They're saying, you know, which place are. And you could think that maybe if you had better insight into where people were crowding, like maybe that's where cities were going to be closing, or maybe that's where they need to be cleaning more or something. So this is what I found. So across the board, the most encounters were not being, the light blue is showing you that there was no amenity recorded for that encounter. And so it's showing you across the board that there were no amenity was recorded. But then if you get the next one, you'll see in Queens, the most encounters were at soccer fields. In Brooklyn, in Manhattan, it was on walking paths. In the Bronx, it was by park benches and playgrounds. And in Brooklyn, it was playgrounds and walking paths. And in Staten Island, it was open fields, like multi-purpose fields. As a born and bred New Yorker, I thought that was just like and I've lived in 3 boroughs, and so it's kind of a fun way for me to think about the different boroughs and what sort of communities live there and what they like to do. And I'm a big soccer player, so yay Queens, or not yay. Sorry, you shouldn't be you should be distancing. So now my next question was, instead of looking at the borough-wide breakdown, can I look at just overall in all of the parks? Would it be interesting to see a comparison of that? And instead of doing a graph this time, I could have chosen to show you on the x-axis all the different amenities and the number. I decided to just do a chart. And so I clicked this summary table here, shows you that the across the board in the city, no value again which means either the parks employee did not record an amenity, or they weren't at an amenity. I don't know if the no value, maybe I need to look in the data dictionary to find out the exact definition, but it could be either one of those from what I gather. It'd be nice to know if it was not, so maybe I'll check afterwards. But then the biggest one was open fields, multi-purpose play areas, which kind of makes sense, and soccer fields. Then I just quickly did a count of how many people they were encountering at these different places. And you can see open fields, walking paths, soccer fields are some of the top 3. And then one of the last things I looked at was what happened during these encounters. So are parks employees intervening? Are people following their instructions? What's happening? And which borough is complying the best with their instructions? And so I found the light blue means that they did not approach the crowd. The parks employee did not approach the crowd. The medium blue means they approached the crowd and the crowd ignored them. And the dark blue means they approached the crowd and the crowd complied. So you can see that there's a lot of not approaching crowds taking place in Queens and Brooklyn. And there's very little compliance, except in Manhattan, which is kind of all around the same. I thought that was kind of interesting, and it makes me wonder, is there a reason that people aren't approaching crowds? And why they're not approaching crowds? And the last thing I looked at was I was curious when these encounters took place. I wanted to find out, was there a certain time of day? But I wasn't able to filter that in time before preparing these slides. But instead, I just looked at the timeline of all the data when they were recorded. And so I was looking at the start of when they started monitoring the parks, and the end when I guess they stopped. It looks like they stopped, which I then found out. I was like, oh, I should have looked at this from the get-go, across what timeline have they been monitoring the parks. And it looks like, it's very active through the summer months, which makes sense. And it looks like right around my birthday on June 16th, there was some action, and around April 19th, a few days after tax day, maybe maybe it was a sunny weekend, I don't know. But anyways, so these are just some fun questions that you can explore and quickly try to answer using the Open Data portal and their visualization tools. And I'm definitely interested in, what questions would you want to ask and dig into? Which leads me into question Q&A time in our last, I guess, 7 minutes. We're going a little over now. So I think that there's some questions. Gabby, Z, Emily, Inej, feel free to come off mute and help with the Q&A. I'll stop sharing. Actually, no, I'm going to share. Yes. All right. Gabby, do you want to read some of the questions off?
Okay, sure. So it looks like the first question posted under Anonymous, it says, are Streetlights available as an open data set? Not the 301 complaints, but the actual Streetlights.
So I can answer that. I know DOT maintains most of the streetlights, and they have an inventory database of all the streetlights. So I mean, but that data set's not publicly available, so you might have to FOIL for that information. Then they also have this really cool manual with all the various types of streetlights based on where it is. So a historical district might get different streetlights from another area, and there's this really awesome like document that shows all the design for that.
Cool.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, and I just wanted to say hi quickly also to, I know North Brooklyn, there's some folks in the room who probably have answers to questions too. So, you know, Katie from North Brooklyn Alliance, Joanna, I know you have a lot of experience with open streets and such, and others in the room have answers, feel free to chime in. Next question.
Sure. So it looks like our next question is from Jim Tormey. It says, how many statues are there in New York City parks, and what city department is responsible for them?
I did see a statue inventory. That's a good question. I would have to check it out on the portal. Or maybe you want to check it out and try your hand at using the tool, unless somebody know the answer off the top of their head. I definitely came across that data set in the open data portal. So I would suggest going to the portal and typing in statues and parks to find out. And if you find it out by the end of the session, let us know.
And if you have any additional questions, you can file a, you can email us, or you can file a research and data assistance request, where we will personally look for the open data set for you, and we'll also, awesome, when Edge posts the link, but yeah, we will look in data set for you and do analysis if you're interested in that.
All right, next question from Wendy. During major construction, on the East River Park, the contractor was monitoring the air quality. Can that data be openly provided to a public map or app? Well, can and will are two different questions, right? I don't know if someone has the answer to this, so please intervene if you do, but my sense is that if it's a contractor monitoring the air quality, they're not under any obligation to make that data available. I know I was once active in some, there was some street under the ground piping taking place. They were like lining the pipes with that nasty chemical, and they were telling us that they monitor the air for their employees, and we were like, can we have the data and see it as well? And they didn't give it to us. Anyone else have any ideas? Or Wendy, did you already ask them?
You know, they are providing quarterly reports, which is too late to do anything about if there's a problem. So I'm actually thinking there needs to be policy around this. So I'm starting to talk to people about it, because why duplicate the effort? And there's so many handy and available apps now that can tell you if air quality is, you know, bad that day. And so many vulnerable people living next to construction sites. So thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk. There's playgrounds, all the places where a lot of places are environmentally unjust when it comes to air quality.
Thank you. Can
you see non-city funding in the data?
So I'm gonna take the screen share for a quick bit, Kate.
Yeah.
So yes, you can see if a project's privately funded. If you go to the capital project tracker page in the NYC Parks website, you can view all active projects or proposed projects or completed projects in the completed projects tab, and then you can click on parks project. So for example, we can go to Casino Park, and we can click on a project and view the details and see who funds that project. So in this case, this is mayoral. This is, I think, mostly mayoral, but these values can also vary. So it can be either from federal, state, mayoral, borough president, and city council member funded. And also private funded, but it won't tell you what company privately funded it. If you would like to see what parks are privately funded, if you go to the New York City Open Data portal and search up capital projects tracker, and then filter for the funding sources that contains private. You see all these projects contain private. You can see all the names of all the projects that are funded privately. So Battery Park, Guard Monument relocation, Susan Smith, Stewart Park reconstruction, et cetera, et cetera. So all these projects are either completely or partially privately funded. And if you have any if you have any questions about using the open data pool, just contact us and we can help you out with that. And while I'm on my screen share, I can answer the next question. Next question was, well, there was a question, I think, on, wait, never mind. I think I misread that question, but if you have like a question about who owns the park, the New York City planning, a capital planning platform is really helpful. So you can scroll into you can filter out for parks, gardens, and historical sites. And then you can zoom into a location and click on any of these sites and you can see who maintains it. So I know for some of these parks, they might not be maintained by New York City Parks. In the case of Castle Clinton, it's maintained by the New York State Office of Parks. Or like if you click on another one, you can see that it may be maintained by other organizations that are not New York City Parks. So I think most Lower Manhattan is maintained by the state. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Awesome, Z, that was great, thank you. So are all park features required to be rated during each inspection? That is a good question. I was reading about that part of the PIP. I bet you, I think the answer is somewhere in the data dictionary or the user guides to the Parks Inspection Program data. Does anybody have the answer off the top of their head?
Yeah, they inspect like flagpoles and like all the small details, I guess, but I'm not sure how thorough and how often. So yeah, I'll post a link to the surveying, well, the information page in the chat.
I think it's like they have to say whether or not it's inspected and then they rate it. So in the report you would see like, was it inspected or not? There should be a value for not inspected if it was not inspected. In plain English, what is a corridor? Casino Corridor Park.
Yeah, if you think like a house corridor, it's a thin like piece of land that connects other parks, I guess, or other locations. So in the case of Casino Corridor, there's Casino Corridor West, which connects Casino Park to Fresh Meadows, and then you have Casino Corridor East, which connects Casino Corridor to, I think, Alley Pond and another park. I'm like blanking on the name, but yeah.
Yeah, so a piece of land that connects to other areas of lands. So
yeah, and it's a very thin park. So
great question. How can I find out how many staff people there are in my local park, like gardeners versus maintenance staff, and what their schedule is? Does anybody have the answer to that? I know I was trying to dig into that and began to find timestamps of like labor and maintenance in some of the maintenance. I think it was the AMP, something like asset management or something data sets. Has anyone explored this?
It's like a really big, huge data set, but you kind of have to kind of pivot that data set to figure out how often your park is cleaned. But yeah, if you need any specific like tips on how to do that, or we can also share how to do that via screenshots, just contact us. I'll put my email in the chat again.
Do you know if there is a way to find out how many staff are in a park?
We can't. I don't, like last time I looked at the data set, I don't think we can specifically look like how many staff is like put in a specific park, but we can figure out how often the park is cleaned and what types of staffs are sent over and what they kind of report. So like they sometimes report like, oh, there's a broken fence, or oh, yeah, Casey also posted in the chat that there is a change dated date.
Oh yeah, please,
okay.
Stephen or Stefan, if you have some light to shed.
Yeah, if you want to pop in voice chat and talk more about that, because yeah, we only know about data, but if you're a parks employee or if you're familiar with how parks employees operate, that's a great thing to share.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
I am a parks employee. I actually work on the open data team. This was really interesting to see. And at least two of the data sets I'm relatively familiar with are the AMPS and daily tasks data set. AMPS, as is in the chat, stands for Asset Management Park System, and that is what we use to track work orders. So specifically, something is broken in the park, we will send tradespeople usually out to fix it. So if a water fountain is broken, there will be plumbers. We employ a wide variety of tradespeople, and basically all of their work is booked through that system. For more regular maintenance like litter pickup, leaves, ice, that sort of thing, that goes through daily tasks, which I believe is also on the Open Data portal. We don't publish data sort of live or preemptively for who's in a park, when or where, but the daily tasks can give you an idea over time when people have visited a given park in the past.
Do you have any idea if there ever would be a way to see schedules?
That is a decision that is made above my pay grade. My gut feeling is that probably not, because there may be privacy and security concerns for our employees. But that's speculation on my part.
Okay, thank you so much for chiming in.
Sure.
That was helpful.
Thank you.
What is the URL for the BetaNYC tool that Gabrielle presented? The board stat?
Yep, I think I shared that link out, but yeah, I'll share it again. Yeah, it's BoardStat. It's an awesome tool that we made with community boards to make it easy for community board members to view through one complaints on each of the boroughs and in each of the community boards. So it's a really cool tool. Check it out.
To anyone, do you use the app on the New York City Open Data website to analyze data, or do you export the data as a CSV or Excel? Do you have a suggested method of open data users? I'm gonna throw that to Gabby and Z.
So the method you see that Kate was using, she was using the visualize tool that really allows you to just get a really general overview, and it's sometimes really hard to kind of finick with that data. But yeah, my suggestion is usually to just download the full data set. But if the data set's too huge, I usually pivot, or in this case, Socratic calls it roll-ups. You usually roll up the data by like a certain date, you filter it by a certain date, and then you kind of get a count for like a week or something like that, or a count for like a certain column to kind of reduce the dimensions, and it's not like 5 gigabytes you're downloading.
Gabby, is that your experience too?
Yes, definitely. I echo everything Zia said. I love using the visualizing tool, just as she just said, to get like an overview of the data, see what it looks like, and then use like the data dictionary and whatnot. And then in the data set is not too large, then I'll usually download it as a CSV. I know for some reason I find it's just easier for me to work with the CSV, but I enjoy using both tools, but ultimately just downloading it as a CSV file.
Cool. Have seen features listed as not rated. Oh, okay. Maybe that's a response to the question about park features being inspected or not. I'm not sure about this question, so okay. And lastly, Gabby, I'm going to let you.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I think someone just typed in yes to what you were saying. Someone named Georgia typed yes.
Cool. You want to take the last one, Gabby?
Sure. So it looks like, how can we get 311 to add parks at his own data set or location across street really isn't helpful. Amen.
Yeah, it's well, I'm just gonna quickly answer that. Yeah, essentially, when you insert like a data, like an address to 311, they ask you for a cross street or they ask you for an address. You can't say I'm at this X and Y coordinate, because 311 will not accept that, and that's just the nature of how the data is collected. So you can't. I don't think you can possibly get the specific location of a broken lamp on a park, unless it's maybe a large park like Central Park, but yeah, for smaller parks is really hard.
And the last question, I'm just putting a link in. Are there studies or reports undertaken for sunshine or shadows over parks throughout hours and seasons? This might aid preferences for gatherings and activities. I know that there's this map the New York Times did a bunch of years ago, mapping the shadows of New York City. I don't know that there's sensors that exist like farming and gardening to like monitor the light. So I know it's possible. Z, if we look at this, the data sets used in this New York Times map, I wonder.
Yes, so New York Times map uses one of the cities, I think the 3D model data set or the LiDAR data set where the city scans like the various features. And then what the New York Times did is they process the information and then they generated shadows for the various seasons. So it's just generally just getting like a really clean data set of all like the current buildings in New York City, and then running a GIS operation on that to figure out how like buildings cast shadows.
Okay, and yes, it is behind a paywall, so not as open as I would think. Am I logged in?
If you open an incognito window, you can view the article not behind a paywall. Hopefully that's helpful. Yeah, and this article is like 5 years old, or yeah, well, yeah, about 4 years, 5 years old. So some of the buildings might cast different shadows or something like that. But hopefully we can get a new like 3D buildings data set from the city, so we can maybe recalculate this or something.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful map. All right. So sometimes, okay, one more. I think I heard at the beginning of the lecture, Park ID is important to use beta.nyc site. Why? I think, Gabby, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that I was referring to like in the very beginning on the New York City Parks website, where one of the features was that it listed like location information, like zip code and so on. It listed like the park ID. Yeah, I'm sorry if I said it incorrectly, but I think I said that was crucial for some data sets on the New York City Open Data portal. Because I know there are certain data sets that sometimes I don't list the actual park name I found. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but at least in the very little bit I've looked into. And so having that in that park ID as listed on the New York City Parks website was helpful to linking and finding out the actual park name. That didn't come up in my specific journey, but it's just something that's like worth noting down for like any future investigations you go on.
Awesome. All right, I think I have a few more slides just to close out. Let me just make sure. So thank you so much for joining us. Like I think Z and Gabby, Emily would if she was, she's on, but so we run this thing called Research and Data Assistance Request, and it's Z and Emily run it as part of our Civic Innovation Lab. It is sort of a growing service we're offering to community boards, council offices, and community organizations who have any questions about research and data that we can assist them on. These aren't supposed to be like thesis long questions, more like one-offs that you just want to like create a quick map or do a quick analysis on. So if you have questions, oh, I guess the link's not there for some reason, but it is beta.nyc/radar. And you can submit, oops, I just sent that to one person, 1 second, beta.nyc/radar. You can submit there, and our team of fabulous apprentices and staff will respond to you. Some other resources for you. We put up all our events on our Meetup. We have a Facebook group where there's a lot of people talking occasionally about civic tech things. We have a Slack channel that we would love for you to join, and we have a monthly newsletter. It's back in action for the past few months. Lots of fun resources from our team up on there. And then upcoming events. These are the only ones I could think of, but I know there's tons more, and we have some in our newsletter from last month. So Today there's a smart cities hearing, and I know Noelle is in there right now, giving them an earful about the words about smart cities. Not laughing about that. But yeah, there's a lot to do before we become a super smart city. And then New York City Open Data Week is happening in March. It's going to be a virtual festival this year of open data events. And so if you're interested in this event, you'll probably find a lot of events that you'll be interested in that week. There is a call for proposals that is technically closed, but if you still have an idea, an event you would like to host that week, you can put it in and we'll review it. And we'll also have a call out for volunteers coming soon. Open Data Week, Open Data Week. Whoops, oh, did I not post the last? Oh, well, we also like to leave a little bit of time at the end for other people to share their calls, announcements, job listings, opportunities, looks, events, questions. Anything? No? Okay, well, it's lovely to see familiar names. Hey, Emily, thanks for joining too. Do you want to say anything? What? You're on mute.
Oh, no, I've got nothing much to add. Thanks everybody for coming and tuning in to learn about this important topic. And yeah, if you have some data crunching issues, get in touch with us by submitting a research and data assistance request.
Yes, and shout out to Emily because she was the one that came out with all these data journeys from the get-go. This is an evolution of her babies. So thanks everyone. We'll see you next time. Have a happy rest of your week. Tomorrow is going to be an exciting day.
All right.
Goodbye, internet.
Bye, y'all.